Shout out to Ring RQ, Julius, you legend. We're going to do a joint interview, yeah? Yeah, we'll do a joint interview, Julius. Thanks for the support. You're a legend. From your girls, Raven and Ellie.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news. Ow!
Okay, we'll start with this. On the heels of his latest win over Robson Conceição, Shakur Stevenson said, if they want me to fight Vasyl Lomachenko, I'm definitely down with that. Having lost both of his alphabet titles on the scales ahead of what was the Robson Conceição fight, the only place to go now is up. If I'm being honest, that's what I wanted anyway, because I didn't figure we'd see Shakur in any more unification matches at 130 pounds. Hector Garcia holding the WBA title and fighting over there on the PBC side of things. Joe Cordina, newly crowned IBF champion, he's over there at Matchroom. I didn't figure that the people at Top Rank would do what they need to do to get those champions over to their side of things, and they certainly weren't about to send Shakur to some other side of the street, so it's that kind of situation. Politics boxing.
No, it is.
Bouts with fully unified, undefeated 135-pound champion Devin Haney and former champion Vasyl Lomachenko appear particularly makeable because Haney and Lomachenko are also promoted by Bob Arum's company, Top Rank. Stevenson mentioned Haney and Lomachenko during his interview in the ring with ESPN's Bernardo Osuna after the Newark native convincingly beat Brazil's Robson Conceição last Friday at the Prudential Center. He reiterated his desire to battle Vasyl Lomachenko during his post-fight press conference. If they want me to fight Lomachenko, I'm definitely down with that, Stevenson said. I would love that fight.
I'd love to see it.
It does feel like a lot must come to pass before it comes to that, before the conversation becomes Shakur Stevenson versus Vasyl Lomachenko.
All these plans are just people talking. Even in our office, there are no real plans. We'll just mix and match where we can and make good fights that way. Let's say Haney beats Kambosos, and Haney says, rather than fight Lomachenko, I want to fight Shakur. We'd sit down and make that happen.
I know that Shakur Stevenson called him out immediately after the Conceição fight. They're on the same side of the street. But I don't get the sense that we're on the eve of Stevenson versus Haney. I get the sense that we might be on the eve of either Haney versus Lomachenko or Stevenson versus Lomachenko. It all depends on what happens.
What happens in the rematch between Devin Haney and George Kambosos, and what happens upon Vasyl Lomachenko's ring return in a matter of weeks.
Against Jermaine Ortiz, and I've still got to get a look at that guy. A second look. I took in the Jamel Herring fight with Jermaine Ortiz, but I didn't take a good long look at him, and that's what I need to do ahead of this Vasyl Lomachenko fight.
It would be a huge fight. I get the buzz from the prominent people that are boxing fans, but not, in the weeds like a lot of boxing people are. And that's a fight that they all mention. It's fascinating. That's the point. The fights that are great fights are fights where there is conjecture about which guy is going to win. The fight that the odds are close and that there's arguments on both sides. That makes a great event and a great fight.
Shakur Stevenson versus either of those guys makes for a great fight. Devin Haney or Vasyl Lomachenko. But I just don't get the sense that we're on the eve of Stevenson versus Haney. I feel like we're on the eve of Lomachenko versus Haney, or even Lomachenko versus Stevenson. Maybe Devin Haney, after the George Kambosos rematch, decides he's done all he needs to do at 135 pounds and decides he wants to move up, at which point the belts might get redistributed and Shakur and Loma might end up fighting for some of them.
Maybe it happens that way, or maybe Devin Haney stays. Fights Vasyl Lomachenko on a big pay-per-view.
While they're settling up with each other, Shakur Stevenson can make his debut at 135 pounds against Jermaine Ortiz.
Maybe it happens that way.
They're both box office fights, in my opinion. Stevenson versus Loma, or Haney versus Loma. I like the both of those fights. I'd pay box office prices to see them.
But like I said, it feels like a lot of things must come to pass first before it gets to Lomachenko and either one of them.
I think it affected my body a little bit. Stevenson said when asked about not making weight, people don't know. They were sitting there talking about, I wouldn't take the 2 hours to lose 2 pounds. They don't know that I lost like 12 pounds in 3 days. So it's like when you get to the very end and you don't got no more sweat coming out of your body and your piss is orange, it's over. Like, it's all the way over. It's no way you're going to make weight. So I think it kind of affected me a little bit. But next fight, I should be 100% strong and feeling real good.
Talk about making weight and needing to move up in weight. I think that Devin Devin Haney may need to move up to 140 pounds.
While we're on the subject of making weight, and why Shakur Stevenson says he was unable to make the weight ahead of the Robson-Conceição fight, as he is set to integrate himself into the lightweight division, Devin Haney may be leaving for that same reason, because it's time for him to move up in weight. We'll see how the cookie crumbles. In any event, this is a part of the reason why I give Shakur Stevenson better odds against Vasyl Lomachenko than I give Devin Haney. A fighter that is struggling to make the weight, their punch resistance begins to wane. First little nothing shot that lands, that has a little something on it, jostles the brain enough, they get rattled, they get stunned. They're on Queer Street, and they're in danger of being knocked out. That's what happens when a fighter's been making a weight for far too long, and they need to move up, but they don't.
Shakur Stevenson won't have that problem. He'll arrive at 135 feeling better than he did at 130 because he won't have to cut the extra 5 to make 135.
Like he had to make 130.
Just thinking about that fight, Stevenson versus Lomachenko.
I've spent more time talking about and thinking about Devin Haney versus Vasyl Lomachenko because they're both at the same weight. But when I think about Stevenson versus Lomachenko, I give Stevenson good odds in that fight because he's a lot younger and a lot fresher than Vasyl Lomachenko. He has been more active in the last 12 months than Vasyl Lomachenko has. Vasyl Lomachenko's 34 years old. Great fighter and former 3-division champion that he might be. He's not getting any younger, and he's not going to get faster with time.
Stylistically, they're both nuanced fighters, both Shakur Stevenson and Vasyl Lomachenko.
Vasyl Lomachenko's got a hybrid-based style. He seems to be a cross between a boxer-puncher and a pressure fighter, whereas Shakur Stevenson, he's got a hybrid-based style. He seems to be a cross between a pure boxer and a boxer-puncher when the circumstances allow it. When the circumstances allow it, he'll let his hands go, like he just did with Robson-Conceição.
He felt what the guy had early on, what kind of power he packs, and he decided that he could afford to take some risks with that guy. He could afford to let his hands go, and he did. It was a fun fight.
I think that Shakur Stevenson, because he's young and his body's still growing, he'll be stronger at 135 than he was at 130. He may never be a knockout merchant, but that doesn't mean that he won't be stronger at a given weight. He might be. Though power overall, I give that to Vasyl Lomachenko. He's proven that he can punch and he can knock you out at 135 pounds. So the edge in power would go to Loma. The edge in speed and reflexes, that might have to go to Shakur Stevenson by default.
It might, because by the time they do fight, if they fight, so Lomachenko's not getting any younger.
Where Shakur would be coming into his prime years. Would Shakur Stevenson, however, take the chances with Loma that he took with Robson-Conceição? I'm not sure. Vasyl Lomachenko is a puncher. He can punch. He can take you out, whereas Robson-Conceição, he's not that big a puncher.
So maybe Stevenson's more pure boxer than boxer-puncher with Loma, but if he is...
He tries to be economic. The work rate and volume punching of Vasyl Lomachenko, well, that might be a problem.
They're both southpaws, so neither one has that advantage over the other.
It's just like Bob Arum says, there's a lot of room for conjecture as far as who wins, because there are aspects of this fight, elements of it, we won't be able to wrap our minds around until they're actually in the ring and they're actually fighting.
You know what? If Vasyl Lomachenko loses to that Ortiz kid, there goes that fucking fight.
This entire conversation will have been much ado about nothing. In men's heavyweight news, former WBC champion Deontay Wilder said, "I hold Alexander Usyk to be a man of his word." In a recent interview, Usyk revealed that he plans to be ringside for Wilder's return, with an eye on facing the winner. Wilder is hoping that Usyk will back up his talk with in-the-ring action. "I heard about the Usyk situation, and he's gonna be there. I hold Usyk to be a man of his word," Wilder said to Sky Sports. "If Usyk's saying he wants to give me an opportunity for the titles, then that's what I'm holding his word to. I always tell people that I don't look past fighters, but I do look through them. There's nothing wrong with that. Being confident in yourself and looking ahead once this chapter is closed."
And I do think he's going to close this chapter on Wilder-Helenius. I think he's going to stop Robert.
A former sparring partner of Deontay's, it's not unusual to see that happen from time to time under the hot lights. In any event, I'm just not convinced that Robert has what it takes.
Listen, some people think think that Wilder's finished. Some people think his punch resistance is all but gone.
Because of the 2 beatings that he suffered at the hands of Tyson Fury, you understand. Those weren't flash knockouts to where a big shot got through early in the fight and the guy went out. Wilder took a lot of punishment in both of those fights before those fights were stopped. The kind of punishment that could take years off a fighter's career. The head and the brain being jostled that much.
2 fights back to back. I get it. I understand it.
But I don't think that Wilder-Helenius is the man for the job. I don't think Wilder-Helenius is the man who can exploit Wilder's weaknesses as a boxer. Quite the opposite. I think he's going to opt to box with Deontay and fight him at range as opposed to stepping into his jab and pressuring Deontay the same way Tyson Fury did.
No, I don't think Robert's going to do that. I think he's going to box him at range, long range.
Long enough that Deontay Wilder's going to be able to get that right hand out there and touch him with it. When he does, Robert's going to go out. Robert's going to get stopped. That's what I think.
He was stopped by Duhaupas. He was stopped by Washington. I think he's about to get stopped by Deontay Wilder.
I've got to handle business at the end of the day. Without handling business, then nothing else is moving forward. I'm taking it one fight at a time. I'm taking it all, one day at a time. Once I've accomplished and finished what I have to do with Robert, then I'll move on. And I'll be looking forward to the next challenge, whether it's Usyk or whether it's anybody else. And anybody else really means Andy Ruiz.
Yeah, Usyk's going to be ringside, and yeah, Usyk is willing to fight Wilder after this fight.
That's all well and good. That's great. But in all likelihood, if Wilder makes it past Robert, the way I think he's going to make it past Robert, in all likelihood, Andy Ruiz will be next, not Alexander Usyk, because Andy is a cheaper alternative to Usyk, while Usyk is no prima donna. He's not a guy that's hard to deal with.
Having become a unified champion, I don't get the sense he's a guy who's going to fight on the cheap either.
Usyk is planning to stage his next fight in the first quarter of 2023. Wilder's fight with Helenius is a WBC semi-eliminator. The winner would be in line to face former unified champion Andy Ruiz in a final eliminator, and the overall victor would secure a mandatory crack at the current WBC world champion, which is Tyson Fury.
Just telling you, they ain't got this guy fighting in WBC final eliminators because they want anything Usyk has.
I'm not against him fighting Alexander Usyk, by the way. That's a genuine box office fight, a genuine box office affair that I'd be happy to pay for, but if I'm being honest, I'm skeptical.
What do you want?
Usyk has no formal agreements with the PBC, and I just don't feel that they'd want to break the bank to do a fight between him and Wilder unless he enters into some kind of formal agreement. And there isn't one. Not at this time.
If that changes, maybe we can revisit this subject.
Maybe we can. Boxing insider Rick Glacier says, seeing the Wilder vs. Helenius pay-per-view boxing event price of $74.99 tells me that Al Heyman follows P.T. Barnum's famous line, there is a sucker born every minute. Yes, and included in those suckers are the race consensus LDBCers and Heymanites. Appreciate a retweet.
Rick don't think this fight is pay-per-view worthy. He don't think Wilder's ring return is box office.
But I beg to differ. I do. You see, Wilder versus Fury 2 and 3, they overshot it with those fights, you understand. They paid too much. There was just too much there in terms of operational costs. And if they would have kept operational costs low, the both of those pay-per-views could have been very successful. $800,000 for the second fight, $600,000 for the third one.
Top Rank's Bruce Trampler said the second fight brought in $19 million at the gate.
I know what you're thinking to yourself. That, yeah, those fights, they did bring in a lot of buys, they did, but he had a really good dance partner in Tyson Fury to help him sell it. And Robert Helenius, well, he's no Tyson Fury, and I understand that, I do. But no one's expecting Wilder to go in there with Robert Helenius. Nobody's expecting him to bring in what he brought in with Fury, you understand. I'd say $325,000 to $400,000.
Don't forget, it's not like you gotta break the bank to pay Robert Helenius. It's not like he's gonna be guaranteed $25 or $30 million the way Tyson Fury was guaranteed $25 to $30 million.
I think the operational costs for this fight are considerably lower than they were for the Fury fight. So there is a chance that this fight could turn over a profit. It could be successful. The real issue is that there's another fight happening that same night. The Devin Haney versus George Kambosos rematch. That's happening on ESPN, the biggest sports network in the country. That may or may not affect things. It all depends on how loyal Wilder's fans and his supporters really are. They're very vocal on social media. They love to start a conversation, love to have an argument, love to have a debate. But will they show up when it really matters? When it really counts? Where it really counts? At the box office and at the gate.
Because that's where it counts the most. Not on Twitter, not on Facebook, not on Instagram, and not on YouTube.
On one hand, you say, there's another fight happening that same night on the biggest sports network in the country, but on the other hand, it's Haney versus Kambosos 2. And anybody that saw Haney versus Kambosos 1...
They likely don't want to see Haney versus Kambosos 2. It's just going to be more of the same.
The first fight did not yield a pleasing aesthetic, and in all likelihood, the second one won't either. So that may or may not affect the buy rate for Wilder versus Robert-Helenius. Just something to think about. In any event, I am expecting Wilder to dispatch Robert. And if he dispatches Robert the same way he dispatched Dominic Breazeale in the early goings of their match, maybe he can move into that Andy Ruiz fight I'm expecting him to have as early as February.
It's Black History Month.
Well, that's what I was thinking. It might seem like a quick turnaround, but don't forget, Robert-Helenius, that's a tune-up fight. That's what that is. That's just for Deontay Wilder to shake the ring rust off.
He knocks that guy out in the first 2, 3, maybe 4 rounds, takes minimal punishment, takes a few weeks off.
Goes into camp early next year for a Andy Ruiz fight in late February, or a little further out, maybe in the spring.
And by the time all of that happens, Alexander Usyk's focus may shift from facing the winner of Wilder versus Helenius to fighting Tyson Fury for undisputed.
Haven't forgotten about that, you know. In the subsequent weeks that have followed the Joshua versus Usyk rematch's outcome, it seems like the focus is kind of all over the place. Joshua versus Fury, Fury versus Char, Wilder versus Helenius, Wilder versus Usyk, when the focal point...
Those are the last 2 belt holders in this division, Tyson Fury and Alexander Usyk, and by February or March...
Yeah, that's where my focus is going to be. I haven't forgotten. I still want to see those 2 guys hash it out. Everything we've been talking about is mean-in-between time stuff. You know, what Fury's going to do with the rest of this year, what Usyk might do at the beginning of next year.
You gotta think about it. Wilder knocks out Helenius, takes care of that guy real fast, they're likely going to move into a Ruiz fight for next year.
Whatever does or doesn't happen between Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua before this year is up, whatever does or doesn't happen with that, so long as Tyson Fury's got that green belt and he stays champion next year, the focus will be him versus Usyk.
Particularly Usyk. Joe Joyce is coming off a career-best win, knocking out Joseph Parker.
Joe Joyce is in a pole position to challenge Alexander Usyk by way of the WBO, and it just so happens that Frank Warren, old fish eyes, he's always had a way with the WBO. So Alexander Usyk, if he means to become an undisputed champion, time isn't necessarily on his side. He has to get Tyson Fury in the ring sooner rather than later, because if he doesn't, Joe Joyce is hot on his trail, and he may catch up to him.
Alexander may not have time to entertain a voluntary title defense against Deontay Wilder or anybody.
He's got Joe Joyce in the queue by way of the WBO, Filip Hrgovic by way of the IBF, and Daniel Dubois by way of the WBA. 3 belts, 3 separate mandatory challengers that are hot on his trail.
Early next year, his focus has to be Tyson Fury and no one else.
That is if he wants to be undisputed.